Hello and Ya Ali Madad, everyone. My name is Amber Altaf, and I will be the moderator for our ALIF parent-student webinar today. ALIF, which stands for American Lived Ismaili Faith, is a new holistic and interdisciplinary year-long program that really enables our 11th and 12th grade students to explore American Ismaili Muslim history and heritage and provides opportunities for college preparedness. ALIF's holistic program includes sessions with our sister institutions, including college preparation, health and fitness, budget and planning, and integrated mental health sessions. The ALIF webinar series has been conceived as an initiative across the youth serving Jamaati institutions aimed at engaging high school students and their parents, but is open to the entire Jamaat. This series aims to explore the foundational underpinnings of the ALIF program through developing a stronger understanding of engaging high school students within the context of our faith. Before we begin, I would like to read a land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements are formal statements that seek to recognize and respect Indigenous people as original stewards of their land and the enduring relationship that exists between the Indigenous people and the traditional territories. We do this to express our gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on today, and to honor the Indigenous people who have been living with and caring for their lands from the time immemorial. Naming the original and current stewards of the land we live on is a first step towards making reparations. I currently reside in Dallas, Texas, which is the traditional homelands and territories of the Caddo, as well as other historical groups, including the Wichita, Comanche, and other smaller tribes. Today, the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma is a federally recognized tribe located in Binger, Oklahoma, which is made up of descendants of the historic Caddo tribes formerly living in Dallas. We believe that the work we do as a Ismaili Muslim community, guided by the ethics of our faith, are part of our ongoing responsibility to acknowledge the ongoing harm that is done to marginalized communities, including the Indigenous people on these lands, and working towards a society that is more just and equitable. Concepts such as these are found embedded throughout the ALIF program. Today, we will explore one of the key underpinnings to the ALIF program, which is titled Understanding Your High School Stressors and Pressures. During this session, you will see a Q&A box through which you can share additional questions and thoughts during the presentation. We will try to address as many questions submitted during today's talk as we can. With that, let me introduce to you our speaker and panelists. First, we have Nalima Kurji. She serves as a mental health board member for Central United States and is a licensed professional counselor in Texas. Next, we have Alina Noorani. She is a first-year student at Mercer University, majoring in business administration, and is originally from Jones Creek, Georgia. She's involved with her school's Children Miracle Network program and is the academic chair for fraternity. Naureen Lakhani is a high school senior from Duluth, Georgia. She is interested in studying international affairs and is on a pre-law track. In her free time, she enjoys reading, writing, and traveling. Sheyan Lalmohammed is a high school senior from Houston, Texas. He is interested in studying economics and computer science. In his free time, he enjoys reading and playing basketball. Saint Benjwani is a high school senior from Chicago, Illinois. He is interested in environmentalism, equity, diversity, and activism. During his free time, he enjoys knitting and spreading awareness on current issues. Welcome Nalima, Alina, Naureen, Sheyan, and Zain. We are honored to have you with us today. So before we hear from our student panelists, I would like to pass it over to Nalima to really explain why are we gathered here today? Why are we talking about the stressors and pressures our high school students face?
Thank you, Amber, and thank you to all the panelists and all the people behind the scenes and who make a program such as this possible. Jumping right into this, we are talking about this because college admissions are approaching, and this is going to be a very emotional and stressful time for many students. The CDC reports that 1 in 5 US teenagers are feeling depressed, and some studies suggest that almost 60% of them are feeling heightened levels of anxiety. If we think about this, the pandemic was much worse for the adolescent population. And this is a two-pronged issue. So adolescents are biologically hardwired for the need for interaction. And this need did not suddenly stop because we are in the middle of a pandemic. The pandemic significantly added to the stress of the teens because it required them to spend significantly more time with people they are trying to individuate from, to separate from, right? So if we think about adolescence, the developmental task of adolescence is to kind of create your own identity, to become your own person. And they had to deal with that along with all the regular challenges of being a teen.
Thank you, Nalima. I guess over to our students, can you explain to us what exactly are the types of stressors and pressures you are facing during your senior year, and what has been the impact on your lives? And feel free to really include any commentary on how the pandemic may have influenced that stress.
So, hi everyone. The first sort of biggest pressures that I was facing in high school, especially because of the pandemic, are sort of an increase in challenging coursework. Obviously, as seniors in high school, we take a lot of hard classes, but on top of that, with COVID, our teachers are missing sometimes, and we have an extra load upon us, and it can be hard to understand that the content that's given to us, and that creates a lot of stress. And along with that, a lot of high schoolers, especially seniors, are involved in a lot of extracurriculars, and COVID can change guidelines and how those extracurriculars are done. And so there's always that constantly changing schedule, which adds on to the stress that we have.
On top of that, when I was in my senior year, the previous year, we were going through the admissions process and the application process for college. With that, our college counselors were going through a period of time where they absolutely did not know what to do because optional test policies were coming out. There were so many factors that a lot of schools were putting into play that college counselors just couldn't really predict what would happen with the schools. And that was a lot of stress on our part because we were preparing throughout high school for that kind of process, and to kind of see all of it change, it just caused a lot of stress on us there.
Yeah, adding on, I think that the general lack of consistency was also very impactful on us as students because for 12 years we've been in person, physically present in schools for learning, for after school clubs, really anything relating to school. And then suddenly this pandemic comes along, and now for a year and a half, we were doing the same thing basically, but from home. So I think the shift in location from school to home and then back to school now has been very difficult, especially since there's that new added pressure of applying to colleges. Um, and so it kind of just seemed like it was building up.
Honestly, I think, audience, we should really just take a moment and acknowledge our youth have been troopers throughout this pandemic, constantly having to adapt to new teaching platforms, navigating really through uncharted times, all while managing their coursework, college applications, which is stressful regardless of the situation. You know, with that said, what are some of those consequences of this high level of stress and anxiety, especially if it's going unchecked?
So I think for me, something that really contributed to increasing stress and anxiety in general was just the amount of missed opportunities because of COVID. For us, our junior year was completely online. So a lot of the resources and things we would usually get from not even just school, but also from Jamaat Khana weren't as available to us, and the things that should have been helping us really get through the admissions project process, we weren't able to get. And I feel like that same thing is to some level also still true for this year as well. And not even just the resources, but also being first generation, all of those things on top of each other kind of made it as if we were just navigating something completely new on our own. And that can really be the main thing that was taking a toll on our mental health. So personally, I really struggled with a lot of anxiety and mental breakdowns. And during this time, as Nalima said originally, like it is a very emotional time. And because we're going through this on our own and nobody around us has really experienced this, it's even harder for us. And so your kids will like break down. It will be really difficult. And I think the biggest thing that my parents did that I think any parent could do that would really help is just I like we understand that it's scary on both sides. Of course, like being a parent, seeing your kids break down like that, it's scary, but just acknowledging that don't put that away. Like don't put it off. Don't be like, oh, like don't worry about it, it'll be okay. But really acknowledge the fact that they're going through this and reassure them that, you know, like we understand, like I hear you, I see you, rather than just getting scared by it and pushing it off.
Thank you, Naureen. You make such pertinent points. I appreciate, all your honesty, and everyone in this panel. It is not easy to come here and talk about really personal stuff and really difficult stuff. So thank you all. In a high anxiety state, the brain is unable to function at peak capacity. So, obviously it's going to be harder to concentrate. Also, if we look at the studies of memory, it shows that it's harder to form short-term memories. So say you're learning an algebra formula, it's going to be harder to learn the formula, and it's harder to retrieve it from long-term memory. So when you're in the exam and you need to pull out that information, it's going to be harder. Another big part of teen anxiety is fear of failure. Fear is one of the most powerful forces in life. Oftentimes, teens feel that, if they fail at achieving their goals, their family will be disappointed, they will be criticized for it. Yes, there are consequences to failing, but the alternative is much worse. Choosing not to pursue your goals means never giving your goals a chance to materialize. If we can talk about this and normalize this, if we can talk about failure and the feelings that accompany failure, such as shame, embarrassment, guilt, anger, it normalizes it. It is, this is a part of being human. We can also teach our teens how to cope with the discomfort associated with failure by talking about our own disappointments. And they see how we deal with our failures. Do we look at our failure as fatal or as final? Or do we look at it as an experience that, that we can learn something from? This reminds me of a quote from Kristen Neff from one of my very favorite books, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself. And she says something like, by giving ourselves unconditional kindness and comfort, while experiencing fear, sadness, shame, which are, of course, all part of the human experience. None of us can kind of walk away from this. When we comfort ourselves and we give ourselves that unconditional kindness, we avoid destructive patterns of fear, negativity, and isolation, not only in ourselves, but also in our children.
Thank you, Nalima. So one thing is certain, right? Stress is inevitable. And maybe not all stress is inherently bad. But how do we know where to draw that line between expectation and challenge? When do we cut, our teens some slack, or where do we keep pushing them? What is that line?
So I remember when I was younger, I was a very overambitious child, and I would go to my parents and be like, "Mommy, Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a doctor or I want to be a nurse." I had a lot of things I wanted to do in life, and um, I was very young when I was saying like I want to be a doctor, I want to be a nurse. And one thing that did change was what I'm interested in, what I want to pursue as I grow up, as I go to college. The one thing that did not change was uh, how my parents and other adults in my life kind of viewed the situation. So even now, while I was applying to colleges and really narrowing my path and kind of deciding how I want to continue, my parents are still like, "Oh, but you said you wanted to be a nurse or you wanted to be a doctor. What happened to that?" And I had to remind them, like, I was I was like 5, I was 6, and so things changed, and I think it's definitely a good thing to give your child some space to grow and be ambitious, but it's also important to not hold them accountable to the same things they were interested in years ago, especially if their interests have changed.
So my sort of expectations that I had to deal with weren't exactly with specific to my career like Zane, but more having to do with the school that I was going to go to for college. Because I'm from Houston, Texas has sort of this notion with especially UT Austin, which is like one of a really, really awesome state school in Texas. There's a lot of students here who get pushed to go to the school because of sort of this expectation that they're going to get a good job, they're going to get a good income. And there's a lot of students here who say great things about it. And sort of for me, my pressure from my parents was, you should go to UT, look how great Austin is. And those sort of things that were trying to push me towards a certain school decision. And I sort of had to deal with the fact that sometimes I think that UT isn't as great of a fit for me as some other schools. And sort of I had to sit down and explain that to my parents, that just because a lot of people generally have a success from that one school doesn't mean that's the only way that I can get there.
Yeah, kind of with expectations also came comparisons to peers, relatives, other people who ended up just having different interests from each other, especially with myself. You know, at the end of the day, we're all on our own path, and it's up to us kind of how we want to pave it. So when it comes to comparisons, it doesn't help because everybody's on a different scale. They're all doing different things. We have different passions that we want to pursue. We have different interests. We want to major in different things. Not everyone can be the same. So comparisons definitely do cause a lot of stress on someone when they're trying to figure out what they want to do, how they'll best be happy with the job that they want to pursue in the future.
So we all want our youth to be successful individuals and happy in their lives. But is the best way to do that is by always expecting them to perform at the highest level, or even comparing them all the time?
Your teens are expected to act like mini adults. You know, we expect them to manage their time, to do their homework, not only do their homework, but get A's, juggle athletics, you know, manage their social lives, sleep enough, eat healthy, and the list goes on and on. At what point do we cross the line where we set up our teens for so much success that we take away their childhood? In fact, even though we don't think, oftentimes, but scientists define adolescence as the period from 11 to 25. To 25. Let's think of that for a moment. During that time, the brain is under construction. There is an imbalance between the limbic system, which controls the emotions, and the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to make decisions, impulse control, planning, all the executive function kind of things. And this is the reason why a teen could be really happy one moment and then be very upset the next, because they feel emotions much more intensely than adults. And their prefrontal cortex has not caught up to the limbic system. So teenagers are predisposed. It's very normal, it's very natural, it's very biological for them to seek short-term dopamine spikes, which means, and it's very easy for them to, want that dopamine spike by doing things like, say, binge watching Netflix. And they may not always have the prefrontal cortex strength to postpone gratification. So it's true that a certain amount of academic stress and anxiety can have a productive and a positive impact on performance, but it must be a right balance. It must be a right balance of expectation and challenge. And that is going to be different for each person. And like some of our panelists said, they are evolving too. So what felt right or what felt like the path a few years ago may not be the one today. So to be able to see that and appreciate that for your kids.
So college is a time for students to make choices from what they want to study to what careers to pursue. That said, how do you maintain a line of communication between, the students and parents? And taking that a step further, how can both sides have honest conversations about their hopes, fears, goals of the future?
So my parents from the start have always been very open and accepting with me. I've never been afraid to talk to my parents about anything. And I think something that really helped with that is we designate like a time and like a space to be able to talk about our lives. So for us, our family has Saturday night dinner every Saturday. And at that time, it's a space for me and my younger sister to talk about anything that's going on in our lives. And that's where most of our, my college admissions conversations happen. That's when I talked about where I wanted to go, how my process was going, things like that. And something that really helped, not only just having that space, but also my parents were always very acknowledging of what I was saying. They didn't show any kind of hesitation or talk or try to push the topic away. They were always very much attentive to it. So for example, they would ask me questions. If I didn't start the conversation, oftentimes my mom or my dad would ask me how it's going, what part are you at? Like, what are you thinking about doing now? And also just things I would always know that they were listening, because things that I would say, they would come back and talk to me about it later. So when I started really setting my mind on going to a school in DC, I would talk to my dad about all these different schools and all the things I liked about them. And my dad would like go off and actually do research on those things and come back to me and be like, oh, did you know there was this thing about this school? So really listening to your kids and showing them through your actions that you're listening and you hear them and you're interested in what they're talking about, I think is super important to keep a good line of communication.
So a few weeks ago, when I found out I got into my top school through early decision, I was sitting in my school's college lab with my college counselor and sending application withdrawals to all the other schools I applied to. And after hitting send, I was really like, wow, it's actually happening. And that kind of made me stress a little bit. So I called my mom and I was explaining to her that I sent my application withdrawal emails, and I told her I was a little nervous, and she told me how she felt the same way when she came to the US from Pakistan, and how um, it was a really difficult transition for her, especially because it was a different country, and she didn't have a lot of family, a lot of friends here. And though I know my experience is not necessarily the same as hers, um, it was important for me to be able to draw that comparison, because um, I know that it got easier for my mom. My mom is such a big and present person in our Jamati community, in our like our buildings community, and so to be able to see an example of things working out really helped me um, find the courage to be able to tell myself everything's going to be okay, which I think was very significant.
Yeah, definitely. And when I went through the process, I did have to kind of come to an understanding as well on my part as a student, more on how what the parent felt. because I feel like at the end of the day, parents do really want the best for us when it comes to kind of explaining our decisions throughout this application process. They're thinking, can I afford this school? Or how far will my child be? Or is this what's best for them, you know, being the person that raised them for their entire life? They're also thinking, will they be able to be independent just out of the blue? And I know those are very big questions my mom was thinking of, especially when I was just coming out of a pandemic, being remote everywhere. And now we're going back in person to these schools. And if we're choosing a school super far and out of state, you know, that's going to be such a huge transition. And she was really worried for me about that. And I never processed that. I didn't think that at that point. So I think sometimes we just underestimate what it will be like. And our parents are really, at the end of the day, just trying to look out for us. They've known the hardships and struggles of moving somewhere completely new. Most of our parents were immigrants. They have immigrated to this country, and they've kind of found comfort in the big supporting a Ismaili community. They're also probably thinking, will there be a Jamaat Khana there? Will they have that community? Will they be alone? A parent, of course, does not want their child to be alone. And I think coming from that perspective, it'll be a lot easier to have that conversation for students that kind of feel this process with communicating with their parent is just a bit harder than others.
Thank you, Alina. Yes, you know, and sometimes, especially with the eldest child, parents hold on to a parenting style that maybe have worked when they were younger, right? So are we doing too much helping by telling them what to do instead of asking questions? Can really undermine a teen's ability to think for themselves, right? And also their confidence. Like, will I be able to be okay without mom and dad telling me what to do? If we fix all their problems as teens, then when they go off to college, they won't have the skills that, you know, they would need to navigate, you know, the roommate situation, you know, saying no to things that they know they don't want to do or are not healthy for them. So even though, you know, sometimes we think, oh, my child is so argumentative, we can actually flip it and say, you know, they're standing up for themselves. And that is a really important skill. If they can stand up to you, then also they'll be able to stand up to a roommate who is treating them poorly, or they will be able to refuse substances that they don't want to take. We also show our kids, you know, by our own handling of difficult situations, right? Teen act up oftentimes with us because they feel safe with us. Along the same lines, we still need to create boundaries, you know, and those boundaries need to come with communication, keeping in mind health and safety, and giving them the space to be the teen. You know, one thing that I would say, you know, the pink hair is going to go away, right? It's going to wash off, it's going to, you know, grow. But if the fight about it was so harsh, those scars are going to live a lot longer for both the parent and the child. So to put things in perspective, that, you know, how am I giving this as much weight as it really deserves? So I would say that, you know, the goal is to allow physical and psychological space for the teen to experience autonomy, and also to help them with navigating the limits, to kind of talk to them about those limits.
Nalima, I think those are all very good points. And that kind of brings me to my next question, is how does our definition of success as individuals, as a community, really affect the decisions that we make and ultimately our mental health?
So I think, sort of for me especially, I think that success isn't just one dimensional. We don't just see success in one way. And I think a lot of people, when they think about college, especially when that extra stress gets added on in their senior year, they're thinking the fact that a certain college will make them successful. Some people associate success with a higher paying income, a better job. Other people may associate success in different ways. And success doesn't necessarily just have one definition. When you go to a college, it's not the college that makes you the best job candidate. It's what you do in that college that makes you the best job candidate. It's easy to associate having a good life with a good education, but more, I'd like the idea of stress is better sort of associated, better handled with the idea that you get what you put into your college experience. And when you're making that decision of colleges, you're not just looking at the education, you're looking at the connections you're building, you're looking at the next 4 years of your life, and you're trying to match what college you choose with the best type of person you are, and who we are is always changing. So sort of like taking on that stress, it can affect our mental health a lot. And so we tend to make decisions necessarily on one subject, but sort of just aiming them towards us would help better help us sort of manage that definition of success for ourselves.
Thank you, Sheyan. Yes, one way is setting realistic expectations and finding a balance between pursuing your interests and understanding the risks associated with it, right? So have the honest conversation that yes, you like this degree, and these are some of the risks of it, and these are some of the benefits of it. um, Choose the right college, I would say, not just the best college, because students who are able to engage more deeply in areas or have experiences that that interest them more do better in school and are more likely to find work once they finish college. And that's the goal, right? Oftentimes as parents we are like, is my child going to is on their path to live their best life? Will they be happy? How satisfied they would be? And if we look at it, research shows us that there is no significant relationship between school selectivity and student learning, future job satisfaction, or well-being. It is more, how much the child or the student is willing to put in. And of course, they're going to put in more if they have ownership of it, if it is a subject that they enjoy and it is driven by them.
So now that we have a better understanding of some of the pressures our students face and really the impact that it's had on their lives, how can we as family members, as a Jamaat, really support our youth?
So I think one of the biggest thing that not even just family members, but anyone can do is just letting the child know that you're proud of them, whether it's somebody that they look up to in Jamaat Khana or your parents. Just that one, those few words like "I'm proud of you" can go such a long way. And not even just only saying it when they get into the school they want or when they do something that you perceive as good, but also just like even if they get rejected from somewhere or waitlisted, anything like that, just saying "I'm proud of you for putting in that effort, proud of you for trying and doing your best" is really important to us as a student. It makes us feel almost like, okay, now we want to try even harder. Like we have that motivation to keep going because you're continuing to motivate us. And another thing that I think is really important is just supporting your child's decisions or supporting the decisions of the youth in your Jamaat. For me, moving away, I'm the oldest child, and so I'm very close with my parents. And moving away was a really big decision for us as a family. And oftentimes, I know my parents have struggled with the sadness and fear of me leaving, but I've also struggled with it. I've also like told my mom, like, sometimes I feel really bad that I'm leaving my family and I'm moving so far away. And so we get those cold feet, just like Zain was talking about, like we too like get those cold feet about moving away. So, but if we've expressed that we know this is the right decision for us, then when we get those cold feet, it's really important for our parents to jump in and be like, hey, like we talked about this and you know what you're doing, you got it. Like this is the best decision for you and you know that's the best decision for you. So just that constant reassurance and motivation is really important in the entire process.
I also think it's important to give your children opportunities to become more independent, especially if you know they're going to go out of state or even out of city for college. Um, so that could include things like doing laundry, dishes, really anything that would help them become more independent. And because these are all skills that we're going to need to know when we go to college. Um, and, mom and dad aren't going to be there with us all the time to do laundry. And so it's important to be able to learn those skills with our parents while we have the time to do that before we go off to college. And more broadly for the Jamaat, if you know you're going somewhere out of state for college, and for me, I grew up in the city of Chicago, and so we have a Jamaat Khana in Chicago, we have a Jamaat Khana in Glenview, we have a Jamaat Khana in Naperville, and so there's a really big Ismaili community. Um, and so for me to go to Connecticut for college, I didn't know anyone that was in Connecticut that's Ismaili, and so to be able to have members of the Jamaat um, connect me and give me the opportunity to connect with Ismaili members in Connecticut Jamaat was a very big step for me, and I'm really appreciative and thankful to have that opportunity to be connected.
I think sort of like the last thing that as us as students sort of want from our parents is just give us the benefit of the doubt. We, of course, are first generation students. The decisions that we make, though they might not always be correct, the decisions we make are the ones that we think that are best for us. We use the resources we have available to try to make the best decisions that we can, and the decisions that we do make is what we feel are best for our future. We all want to have a great and successful future, and our parents, sometimes we just want our parents to understand that sometimes our choices aren't the way that they imagine them, but the decisions that we make are what we think will make us successful in our own way, and we just want sort of them to validate that, to accept that, sort of like Naureen was saying earlier.
Sheyan, Zain, Naureen, Alina, honestly, I just want to take a moment and really acknowledge all of your honesty and authenticity that you brought to today's conversation. It really does take a lot of courage and vulnerability to speak about mental health on a nationally broadcasted platform, right? But I am certain this will have a cascading impact on our Jamaats youth and really start these conversations of where do we go from here. But before we take questions from the audience, I will pass it to Nalima to summarize and share some of her final thoughts on how we can continue to support our students' mental health.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for everyone joining in. And really, I'm so honored to be with the students. They are so authentic. They're talking about things that need to be talked about. And so I do hope that we hear them and we go back and engage in the discussions that we have talked about. To summarize the points, I would say validate their feelings, accept what's not perfect. Focus on what's going well, because sometimes we are so used to talking about problems or so used to talking about what's not going well, we almost limit ourselves to that. So I would say actively make an active decision that I'm going to look at my child and think, what is going well with them? What are their strengths? What are they good at? Communicate, ask your student, how can I support you? And that would mean different things for different people. I know Amber in one of our sessions one time said that, she was so stressed out one time and her mom asked her, what can I do to support you? And she said, Mom, can you make me biryani? So it's different for different kids. For some kid, it might be, Mom, can you not ask me about college anymore? I don't want to talk about this for a week. So to have that, that, okay, I'm going to give you this space and we'll talk about it, when you feel more comfortable, because I don't want to add one more thing, one more stressor to your table. I would say ask questions, open-ended questions instead of offering discussions. Listen and validate. Give them the opportunity to realize their own resilience. Yes, this did not go how you wanted, but, remember the times when you were successful, right? So you were successful in the past, you can do this again. Doesn't necessarily need to be related to academics. It could be related to life. It could be related to learning a new skill. And to remember that you are, you probably going to learn more from things that you fail at, because they teach you resilience, they teach you courage. I would also say expectation that, where am I today compared to where I was in the past, rather than, comparing them to others, to be able to look at it that, can I appreciate the effort that they put in, not necessarily the outcome. So where they are admitted to, or their grades are really and should not be a measure of their self-worth. You can go to a college that maybe is not as well known and do really well there. So most important are work ethic, integrity, a can-do attitude. And these are truly, even if we look at science, much more predictive of success. One thing I would tell the parents and students, is don't make big decisions on your worst days. Also remember that feelings are transitory, right? That it is a thought, it's not reality. So to make a check, am I making really big decisions about my future in moments when I'm feeling really sad or upset? And one more time, these are only 16, 17-year-olds. So let's put that in perspective. Let's keep that in perspective. And, that would be my sum up for today.
Wow, thank you so much, Nalima. So it seems like if we were to take away 3 words from today's conversation, it would be validation, communication, and expectation. Thank you to our entire panel for these reflective thoughts. So with everything that's been said, we have received a few questions from our audience, which I'm sure we would love to hear your thoughts upon and we would all benefit from. So with that, let's turn to the first question. How do you manage the stress a child may be feeling about getting high grades? And note, this pressure is actually coming from the student, not the parents. Alina, do you want to take a stab at this one?
Yes, definitely. And this is also because I am exactly that way. I was exactly that way. I did take on a lot of stress with getting these high grades because I just knew how important they were. And it's always been a stressor throughout basically all of high school that your grades are pretty important. The one thing that I did have to learn was that stress will always be there. But there are ways you can take it off of you, and in ways that can be beneficial towards actually attaining those high grades. You'll probably have classes in which you need to take them to graduate. You need to take them to just to fulfill like a course prerequisite, but you do want those grades in them. I think with all the stress that's kind of happening around that, you should have something on the side that you're doing that can take your mind off of it for a couple of seconds. So that way, when you get back to it, you can take a stab at it, but with a bit of a stronger mindset, because it can just be stressful. So for example, I relied on sports. You can rely on arts and crafts. You can rely on anything, just something that'll really take your mind off of it for a bit, because if you're really stressing about those grades for too long, it can actually hurt you. And suddenly the motivation to be able to learn, which I think is a pretty big aspect of taking a class, is learning that material, really absorbing it, that can just go away and your goal just looks a little fuzzy at the end. So I think really having that side activity, something like that can really help you, is really beneficial towards managing that stress through getting those high grades.
Thanks, Alina. Another question we have is, we often see parents comparing how our children are doing with others in the community, particularly in our Jamaat Khana. How can we begin to support our parents and students with this added community pressure and judgment? Zain, want to take a stab at this one, especially kind of coming from that big Jamaat Khana?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first step would be to engage in those conversations with one another. Um, and just say not everything is a competition, because especially from um, like children's perspective, to be able to notice their parents engaging in these conversations and letting it be known that um, they don't do that. They respect and are proud of their students for um, whatever it is that their children decide to pursue, and um, saying from one auntie friend to another auntie friend, like, hey, maybe we should not be comparing our children's whatever it might be, is more impactful than hearing it from some panelist on the other side of the country. And so I think as parents, it is important to be able to have those conversations, and to also encourage your children to have those conversations as well. That, hey, not everything in life is a competition. We all have things that we're good at, and we all have things that we're not so good at, and to really be proud of the things that we are good at, because it's important to be able to um, acknowledge all the things that we are good at. Um, I think that would be able to help foster um, a safer community, a less judgmental community, and an overall supportive community. And coming from a high schooler's perspective, that would be very beneficial, and very happy for me to be able to see that.
That's a very good point, Zane. I think you're so right that this sort of effort starts from each one of us, right? In each of those conversations, and kind of re-navigating it towards, like, there's no need, to be competitive, and we're going to, let's hope for the best for our child. That brings me to our next question. So as a parent, how do you work with your child when you know that there is no Jamaat Khana at a particular university city, so they are still connected to their faith and Ismaili community? Naureen, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so this is something that my family has been and currently still is kind of struggling with. So I was born in Louisiana and we moved to Georgia specifically. Like a big thing was because of Jamaat, kind of because of the Ismaili community. So my entire life, my entire family has been very involved with Jamaat Khana in the community. And so when I decided to go to school in DC, that was a really big thing for my parents because there's no Jamaat Khana close by except in like Virginia, which is like a 20-30 minute drive away. Obviously, I'm not gonna have my car, things like that. And I think something that really helped to put them at ease is the fact that even though there isn't a Jamaat Khana, there's still a Ismaili community. And so we've been reaching out to people who we know live in DC, or students that we know are Ismailis that live in DC, that study in DC. And we've found little things that can help them stay connected to their community and their faith. For example, like in DC, they have like a small gathering for Ismaili students to say dua and things like that. And that can be found in a lot of different college towns where there aren't Jamaat Khanas nearby. So just looking into those things, there are definitely those little hidden things that will help your child stay connected to the Ismaili community and to their faith. You just have to like dig around and find connections to people. And the Ismaili community is extremely connected. Anywhere your child goes, there will be some Ismailis there to help them out and help them stay connected with their faiths.
Yeah, definitely. And to add on to that, because I do go to a school where there isn't a Jamaat Khana around, when it comes to really connecting to my faith, I know some of it does kind of have to come from me at times. So it may just be a hectic day. There are going to be weeks where you're flushed with tests. You've got a lot going on. There's so much happening, and sometimes you don't even have the time to really connect to that community out there. So what I do is I do set some time aside in my day to really sit down and maybe just say my dua. I know at times it may feel like, oh, this is something that I'm doing over and over again, but trust me, if you give yourself that peace of mind and that time set aside just to connect to your faith individually, it goes a long way, because that way you still kind of feel connected to that spiritual aspect of it.
So moving to the next question that we have from the audience. What do you do when your teen actually doesn't want to share anything with you? And even if you're not much of a strict parent, how can you cultivate a stronger relationship with the child? Sheyan, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, so for me, I was sort of like this a little bit like in my sophomore and junior years. I held back from my parents. I didn't think they would understand. It wasn't sort of like I didn't want to talk to them, but sort of the idea that I didn't think that they would understand what I was saying anyways. And sort of that kept me from having that open line of communication with them. But I guess what it finally took for me to have that stronger connection with my parents was them just saying, like, sort of making that initiative, that they came up to me and they were like, let's sit down, let's talk this through. And even though they understood very little about the college process, about the decisions that I was making going into my senior year, they did their best to understand. And even now we go through on a weekly basis and sort of just talk through the things going on. And if there's things that they don't understand, then I explain it to them, and they give their input as much as they can, to the extent that they can. And they try not to overstep into the decisions I'm making. And I think that plays a big factor in me continuing to be open with them, is that they respect the decisions I make. I respect the feedback that they give me, and I use it to the best of my ability to continue to have that conversation with them.
Nalima, any thoughts here from your perspective on how to kind of continuing to improving that relationship with your child?
If we look at it from a science perspective, whether it is addiction or whether it is success, the relationship between the parent and the child really is one of the most important relationships, right? So I know we have a question that came in about screen use, and I would say that the child cannot feel that they are being singled out for their use, right? So to understand that, how am I using it? Am I bringing my phone to the dinner table, right? Also ask them how they feel when they are not using it. Try to understand the reason behind it, because sometimes is it easier to say no to somebody when you are saying it via a text? So maybe once we start talking to our kids more and practicing that, it's okay to say no sometimes, or it's how are we having the difficult conversation? So how are we can even role play with them, so that when they are nervous, they are not likely to just, reach out to their phone or isolate just using the screen. Uh, another, I think another part of this is to understand that in an evolutionary perspective, right? Every generation thought that what the younger kids were doing was something detrimental and dangerous and things like that. So yes, too much screen time is not good for you, but to understand that the world has changed, like think about it. When I'm seeing the BBC News, I think I'm getting, wow, smarter, or I'm getting information. My kid may not be getting information the same way as I am, right? They may be getting it through a different site. So to talk about it, that just because they're getting it on the screen doesn't mean it's any less. And also to talk to them that, which sources you're getting the information from, whatever the device is. So again, I would come back and say that they are more likely to listen to you if you have a good relationship with them. So my final words would be, focus on that. Don't make them feel like you're punishing them, and don't make them feel like they are being singled out for their use. Have healthy boundaries. So for your family, it would mean no phone after 10 o'clock, or it would mean no phone during dinner. But have those conversations together and understand that they are getting a dopamine rush every time they're clicking. So it's a lot harder for them to not click and to understand it from their perspective as well. And I'll give it off to you, Amber.
Great. One more question that we have here. It seems that my child does not feel stress and pressure at school, and we're seeing their grades drop. How do I understand how my child is doing? I mean, personally, this sounds like, is this senioritis? I don't know. Does anyone want to take up this question? It can be our student panelists or Nalima, whoever feels comfortable answering.
so what I'm guessing is that they were very motivated and maybe they are not so motivated right now, right? Sometimes if the task is so overwhelming that they might not want to deal with it at all. So I would also kind of reach out to the school, and sometimes teachers have a lot of input as to what goes on in the classroom and are they seeing it and why they are seeing it, to kind of have that communication that what are your goals, what are your short-term goals. And this is also a good place to bring in values, right? We if I can align my action to my value, then it is easier for me to do difficult things. So to talk to your child about their values, what do you value, what do you want for the future? So I would say that look at it in a broader perspective, that what's going on internally with them, what is going on internally with them, and also what is going on in their environment. Are they just exhausted? Is this just to a point where it is too much? So I would say that look at those pieces as well.
Also, I think like this is something I kind of struggled with in my junior year. I think after being in school for so long, it starts to become almost tedious by the time you get to 11th, 12th grade, and it becomes just a lack of motivation, especially into your junior, senior year. And something that really helped me kind of pick it up and get back, as like Nalima was saying, like setting goals. I kind of started to, the junior year is when I started to get into like my college research, and the idea of like getting to move and getting to start over in college was something that really pushed me to like keep my grades going, to like, so like having that conversation with your child about like, what do you want to do in the future? Like, where is your mind at? Because if they can start to materialize almost what they see in their future, if they can almost start to materialize like where they want to go or what their end goal is, even if it's just like, when I graduate, I want to graduate with honors, or I want to have this cord for this club. Things like that can really help you kind of get back into that motivation, that push to keep going when things are getting a little standstill or a little tedious.
Great points, Naureen.
Thank you all to both our speaker and panelists for a wonderful conversation and offering so many of your thoughts, for also the questions that came through the audience. And audience, thank you so much for joining today's conversation. I think that this is a pivotal starting point as a community as we change the conversation around mental health. So a couple announcements before you go. To learn more about this topic, we are adding a few links to resources in the chat box. And if you are more interested about learning about ALIF, joining the team to teach or train and coach our teachers, please also visit the link posted in the chat box. The recording of this conversation and past conversations, please visit the Facets of Faith page on the.ismaili USA, and the link will also be posted in the chat. Also, last but not least, please take the survey at the end of this session that will pop onto the screen as you leave. With that, thank you all, and Ya Ali Madad.